Welcome. Today we're beginning a really intense, focused exploration into source material that outlines a life story that is, well, it's so radically divided, so full of contradiction, that it genuinely challenges how we think about public service and ultimately private tragedy.
That's absolutely right. The documentation you shared with us, it gives us this incredibly comprehensive biographical and legal profile of Aisling Tucker Moore Reed.
Who's probably best known to the public by her pen name, Tucker Reed.
Exactly, Tucker Reed.
And we're going to be tracing a singular, and I think it's fair to say, a heartbreaking path. We're going to follow her trajectory from being a young adult novelist with a six-figure book deal, a nationally celebrated activist, leading the fight against gendered violence,
Right.
all the way to her conviction as a felon, now serving time for manslaughter. The sheer complexity packed into such a short amount of time. That's really our analytical challenge today.
It is, and it requires some very careful handling, especially when we're dealing with the factual record. We have to try and reconcile these disparate parts of one life. You have the immense literary promise, the high-profile advocacy, and then this severe finality of the criminal outcome. So our goal here is to be very strict. We're adhering only to the documented facts, the public record of her achievements, the legal allegations and the countersuits, and of course the established judicial outcomes that are provided right here in the source material.
So our mission is to painstakingly unpack this chronology for you. We'll examine her dazzling early accomplishments, we'll chart her sudden, really controversial shift into public advocacy, and then we're going to dedicate significant time to analyzing the details of the 2016 fatal shooting and the complex legal proceedings that cemented her conviction. This is all about establishing a clear chronology and really understanding the significance of each documented event. Okay, so let's begin where the documentation starts. With the initial rise, the establishment of her public persona as a literary talent. Aisling Tucker Moore Reed was born on October 15, 1989.
Right, in Los Gatos, California.
And she would be 36 years old in 2025, which is the time context for all of this source material.
And that background is, I think, crucial to understanding her early opportunities. She is the daughter of Kelly Moore, who is herself a New York Times best-selling author.
Okay, so a literary family.
Very much so. And her father, Daniel Reed, was an English teacher. So this immediately positioned her in a highly literate, very creative, and you have to assume, academically supportive environment. The sources also cite a claim of lineage.
Oh, this was interesting.
It is. They specifically note descent through her maternal grandfather from Stephen Hopkins, who was a signer of the Mayflower Compact. So it connects her to this very deep-rooted American historical narrative.
That's quite a foundation. And it clearly fueled her high school career in Oregon at Ashland High School, which, it reads like a list of superlative achievements. She wasn't just doing well in her classes. She was actively laying the groundwork for a career focused on public communication and the arts.
You can see that intense dedication to communication really early on. She was a reporter, a web designer, and she eventually achieved the title of editor-in-chief for the high school newspaper, The Rogue News.
So she's not just writing, she's leading. She's managing the whole operation.
Exactly. It shows not only a mastery of writing, but also leadership qualities.
Yeah.
And, a grasp of media, which would definitely serve her later in her activism. Her creative writing talents were also nationally recognized during her junior and senior years. She was receiving accolades for various essays and short stories.
And the creative side wasn't just limited to the written word, which I found fascinating. The documentation really emphasizes her strong involvement in the arts. She was a singer-songwriter in an alternative rock band, and her participation in theater was, comprehensive. She's taking on lead roles, and then she's also getting involved behind the scenes with set and costume design for school and community productions.
It really does. It paints the portrait of an incredibly gifted, multifaceted individual who seems completely poised for creative professional success.
And that success arrived startlingly fast.
Unbelievably fast. In 2009, she was only 19 years old when she successfully convinced her mother, Kelly Moore, to collaborate on writing a novel. This writing team then later expanded to include her sister, Larkin.
And this family collaboration, it quickly becomes a commercial phenomenon. Just 2 years later, in 2011, the trio secures what the sources report as a massive six-figure financial deal.
A six-figure deal. with the Arthur A. Levine imprint of Scholastic Press. That's a huge name in publishing.
A huge name. And this was for the North American rights to what was planned as the Amber House trilogy. I mean, for a young adult debut, especially one that's written collaboratively, this is just an exceptional level of commercial validation. It instantly put her on the national map.
And that initial literary promise was fulfilled pretty quickly with the publication of Amber House in October 2012. And that was followed by the sequel, Never Was, in January 2014. Her career gained immediate high-level critical momentum right from the very first book's release.
And the critical reception was truly robust. I mean, Publishers Weekly, which is a major industry voice, praised the originality of the concept. They called the story, and I'm quoting here, rich, strange, and utterly fascinating.
And that kind of opening endorsement is just invaluable for any debut author. You can't buy that kind of praise.
No, you can't.
And equally strong was the backing from Kirkus Reviews, which specifically lauded the novel's protagonist, highlighting her as a strong, admirable character for the young adult demographic.
And what's particularly insightful here, I think, given the later turn in Reed's life, is that Kirkus made a point of contrasting this heroine favorably with Bella Swan of the Twilight franchise.
Right, which was massive at the time.
Exactly. So they're suggesting a move toward a more empowered, less passively romantic female role model. It's a very specific kind of praise.
It is. It's framing her work as part of a new wave in YA fiction.
Beyond just the reviews, the professional recognition continued to stack up. Amber House was named a finalist for the 2014 Oregon Book Award for Young Adult Literature. Furthermore, it was selected for the Texas Library Association's 2014 Pashas list.
And that's a major selection. It's aimed at inspiring reading among Texas teenagers, so it has a real impact on circulation and sales.
These achievements just underline that she wasn't only commercially successful, she was critically respected within her genre.
And she also cemented her direct connection to the work by narrating the audiobook versions of both Amber House and Never Was herself.
So she's the voice of her own work, literally.
Literally. And just to close out this early chapter, we can track her brief academic and journalism career. She attended the Universities of Southern California, USC, beginning in 2010.
And she was focusing on broadcast journalism, theater, and cinema, so all very much in line with her creative talents.
Completely. She worked for the student newspaper, the Daily Trojan, utilizing that journalism background. However, she dropped out of USC in 2014.
And her final foray into professional journalism was a pretty short stint as a reporter for the Grants Pass Daily Courier in early 2016.
Right before she quit that spring. And that's just months before the defining incident of her life.
It's so clear that by early 2016, she was no longer pursuing these, stable paths of literary fame or local journalism. This immense talent and this drive for public communication were about to pivot into a new and very, very confrontational public role. So now we transition to that second intensely complex chapter, the shift into high-profile activism, where Reed suddenly becomes this national figure fighting gendered violence, drawing a whole new kind of notoriety completely separate from her literary world.
And this is where we have to be extremely precise with the language that's used in the source material because the facts are so heavily disputed. Reed publicly identified herself as a survivor of what the sources strictly classify as unsubstantiated gendered violence.
Specifically alleging sexual abuse against women.
Yes. And her method of advocacy was immediate and highly controversial. She published the name of her alleged assaulter on her public blog.
Which is a huge step to take.
A massive step. And the documentation references this act, citing an Australian criminologist and feminist, Anastasia Powell, who identified this method as engaging in behavior traditionally classified as vigilante conduct in resistance to rape culture.
That term vigilante, it perfectly encapsulates the high-stakes public nature of her chosen form of advocacy. She's taking matters into her own hands.
She is. But what is critical for you to grasp here is the immediate documented conflict between her public claims and the institutional and legal findings. So the Student Judicial Affairs and Community Standards Office at USC investigated her claims.
And what did they find?
Their judicial outcome was, and I'm quoting the official finding, the burden of proof was not reached to find that a violation of the Student Conduct Code occurred.
So from the university's perspective, there wasn't enough evidence to proceed.
Correct. And this wasn't the only institutional rejection. The case was subsequently reviewed and then rejected by the Los Angeles Police Department, by a private investigator, and by the Los Angeles District Attorney.
So every official channel she went through came back with the same result.
Yes. For an activist who is staking her public reputation on a specific claim of victimhood, These repeated rejections by law enforcement and judicial bodies are, immensely damaging to the credibility of that specific claim.
And the damage was made legal and public through a countersuit.
It was. The individual she named on her blog filed a defamation suit against her, and the documentation clearly states that Reed was found liable for defamation.
Let's just pause on that point because I think it's analytically crucial. For anyone listening, what does being found liable for defamation actually mean in this context?
Well, it means that a court of law legally determined that her public statements, which were the core of her activism at that time, were factually untrue and caused provable harm to the alleged perpetrator's reputation.
So it's not just a disagreement, it's a legal judgment against her statements.
It is. Legally, this outcome entirely undermines the factual basis of her initial high-profile claims. It establishes that her public narrative was insufficient to meet the standard of proof required by the judicial system. This defeat is a massive, documented fissure between her public identity as a survivor and her legal reality as a defamer.
And yet, despite this severe legal setback, her activism didn't stop. It transitioned from these specific personal claims to broader policy advocacy focused on systemic issues at colleges.
Exactly. She became a major proponent for requiring mandatory exit surveys on college campuses.
Which she began proposing in September 2013.
Yes. These surveys were a very practical policy tool. They were designed to monitor the efficacy of student safety policies and, crucially, to ensure institutional compliance with the Clery Act.
For our listeners who may not be familiar, can you just briefly explain what the Clery Act is?
Sure. The Clery Act is a federal statute. It requires all colleges and universities that participate in federal financial aid programs to disclose information about crime on and around their campuses. So Reed's argument for these exit surveys was that they would provide an external reference point. They would prevent internal corruption or, the easy dismissal of valid student safety claims by college administrations. It was actually a sophisticated, high-level push for institutional transparency using data.
She certainly put a structure around her efforts. She founded the Student Coalition Against Rape, SCAR,
which began at USC and then rapidly expanded into a national organization. She was actively working to assist students at multiple institutions in filing office for civil rights complaints against their respective colleges. It shows a deep commitment to systemic change beyond her own case.
And this organizational effort brought some very high-profile recognition. In 2013, she received the Lucy Burns Challenger Award from the Veteran Feminists of America.
And look who she's receiving it alongside. She's on stage with figures like the famed attorney Gloria Allred and the Grammy Award winner Helen Reddy. So receiving this honor placed her advocacy efforts in a highly visible and respected feminist context. And this is happening despite the concurrent legal challenges she was facing regarding that defamation suit.
Her media visibility was extensive during this period. She became a very public voice, making appearances on major news programs on CNN, CBS, and NBC.
And contributing original writing to significant publications like Cosmopolitan and the Huffington Post, she genuinely became one of the most visible faces of the anti-gendered violence movement on college campuses.
And her stated ambition during this period was clearly defined in the sources.
Yes, she hoped, and this is her quote, that ultimately sexual aggression will become as socially unacceptable as smoking in a crowded room.
So this whole chapter is defined by this intense, sophisticated public advocacy, which she achieved despite the massive legal blow of being found liable for defamation in a civil court.
It is truly striking. I mean, how these two conflicting legal realities, the public recognition as a leading activist and the legal ruling that she had defamed an individual, existed simultaneously. It just highlights the severe contrast between a public narrative and the documented judicial record.
We now have to move to the defining and truly tragic incident of July 2016. This is the event that irrevocably altered the course of her life, from that of a public advocate to a defendant facing felony charges. And we must proceed here with the gravity that's necessary for any discussion involving the loss of life, particularly regarding the victim, Shane Patrick Moore.
Yes. This devastating incident occurred on July 26, 2016 in Applegate, Oregon. Reed was arrested in connection with the fatal shooting of her maternal uncle, Shane Patrick Moore,
who was 63 years old at the time.
He was, and the shooting occurred at his parents' home, so Reed's grandparents' home.
The legal system reacted very quickly. Just 3 days later, on July 29, 2016, Reed was formally indicted by a grand jury on charges of first-degree manslaughter and second-degree manslaughter.
And her bail was subsequently set at $200,000.
Now, these initial charges are significant. Manslaughter, as opposed to murder, suggests a lack of premeditated intent. It focuses more on recklessness or criminal negligence.
That's right. And we have to acknowledge the immediate family context that entered the public sphere. Her mother, Kelly Moore, spoke to the press right away, stating that her daughter was acting to protect her against the uncle.
So this introduced a narrative of self-defense or defense of others right at the outset.
Exactly. And that would be a crucial claim in understanding the defense strategy as the case moved forward.
But despite that initial defense narrative, the criminal case proved to be lengthy, complex, and it actually escalated. More than 2 years later, in September 2018, the charges against Reed were significantly heightened.
They were. Deputy District Attorney Marco Boccato publicly cited that, and I'm quoting him, some new evidence had surfaced. This led to the addition of a charge of second-degree murder.
So that's now layered on top of the existing felony counts of first and second-degree manslaughter.
It is a fundamental shift in the prosecution's case, and it really warrants analysis. A shift from manslaughter to murder indicates a change in the state's theory regarding criminal intent.
Right. Can you break that down for us?
Well, manslaughter, as you said, implies reckless or negligent action leading to death, often without the intent to kill. Second-degree murder, however, implies malice or intent, even if it's not fully premeditated. The introduction of this charge dramatically increased her legal jeopardy and the potential sentence she was facing.
And the case was prosecuted jointly by Boccato and the district attorney, Beth Heckert, in Jackson County.
Which indicates the seriousness with which the state was pursuing these escalated allegations, especially given that reference to new evidence that Boccato made.
Then, in a detail that just adds another bizarre twist to this timeline, in January 2020, while Reed was being held in pretrial confinement at the Jackson County Jail,
she faced additional charges, completely unrelated to the homicide. The sources document charges of supplying contraband and unlawfully possessing heroin while she was incarcerated.
That detail really speaks volumes about the challenges and the environment of her pretrial detention, totally separate from the homicide case itself.
It certainly does. However, the core criminal case, the one for the death of her uncle, eventually reached its resolution through a negotiated settlement in May of 2020.
A plea deal.
Yes. On May 27, 2020, Reed entered a plea of guilty to a single reduced charge, second-degree manslaughter in the death of Shane Patrick Moore.
Okay, let's break down the significance of that plea bargain for the listener, because it really is the definitive legal outcome of this whole tragedy. By pleading guilty to second-degree manslaughter, what did she achieve? And more importantly, what did she admit to?
Well, she admitted to reckless behavior or criminal negligence that directly caused her uncle's death. That's the admission. But crucially, as part of the deal, the most severe charges, the original first-degree manslaughter charge and that escalated second-degree murder charge, were dropped.
So she avoids a trial for murder.
She avoids a trial where a jury might have found the necessary intent for murder, which carries a much, much heavier penalty. This negotiated settlement, therefore, establishes the definitive legal fact. Her action resulted in death, and that action is legally classified as second-degree manslaughter.
And the outcome of that plea deal was a sentence of 6 years and 3 months in prison.
Yes. That is the final documented consequence of the most tragic event in her life. And it's a consequence established not by a jury's verdict, but through a legal negotiation.
So following her conviction, Reed begins her incarceration, but the sources indicate that even while in confinement, the bizarre duality of her life continued. She is currently incarcerated at the Coffee Creek Correctional Facility in Wilsonville, Oregon.
And one of the most jarring details that's documented is her involvement in an independent horror movie. It's titled From the Dark.
And this film was released on November 20th, 2020. Now, the timing here is critical.
It is. The movie was filmed after the fatal shooting of her uncle, but it was released after her guilty plea and incarceration. She used the stage name Win Reed for the role.
Wait, just to be clear. She was acting in a horror movie while she was facing it, was then convicted of homicide charges. That single detail seems to perfectly capture this entire narrative of contradictions.
It does.
A convicted killer continuing a creative career that deals in fictional violence. It's an almost unbelievable counterpoint to the seriousness of her 6-year prison sentence.
It provides a very stark contrast between her legal status as a felon and her enduring creative aspirations. However, on the legal front, she did attempt to challenge the very foundation of that sentence.
Right. In January 2021, so less than a year after her sentencing, Reed filed a malpractice lawsuit against her own defense attorney. What exactly was she alleging in this suit?
Her core allegation was that her defense counsel had failed to provide adequate representation. Specifically, she claimed that he had forced her to accept the plea deal.
So she was arguing the guilty plea was not voluntary.
Correct. She claimed it was not voluntary or true. This suit was essentially an attempt to retract her admission of guilt in the death of her uncle.
But the courts were decisive on this matter. The source documentation shows that this malpractice lawsuit was dismissed by the court just a few months later, in May 2021.
And that dismissal legally reaffirmed the original plea deal. It solidified the validity of her sentence for second-degree manslaughter. There was no going back.
In terms of her sentence duration, the sources, specifically referencing a subsequent NBC documentary, cited an alleged release date for her conviction of November 2024.
Right, which puts the duration of that 6-year and 3-month sentence she received in May 2020 into a concrete context for you, the listener.
And finally, her entire case, this bizarre path from a critically acclaimed young adult novelist and policy activist to a woman convicted of killing her uncle, it's attracted significant attention from true crime media. It just underscores the compelling, if tragic, nature of her narrative.
That narrative duality proved, irresistible to producers. In October 2020, Dateline NBC launched a dedicated podcast about the killing.
And it was titled Killer Roll.
Killer Roll, directly referencing her creative and legal paths. It's right there in the title.
And then following that high-profile coverage, the case was later profiled in an episode of the long-running true crime program Snapped.
So the media's focus on this story just reinforces that central tension we've been discussing. The collision between her highly public, positive identity as an advocate and the legally documented facts of the violence that led to the death of a family member. It is a profound demonstration of how quickly and how completely a life's narrative can be redefined by one legal event.
So as we synthesize the major insights from the extensive documentation you provided, the overwhelming theme, it just remains the absolute stark juxtaposition between the different phases of this life.
Indeed. We have the documented history of a young woman who achieved exceptional success very early on. She secured a 6-figure book deal, critical praise.
And then became a respected national figure dedicated to fighting gendered violence. She's receiving awards from established feminist organizations.
And yet, this life of literary achievement and high-profile activism ran directly into 2 instances where the formal legal system aggressively rejected her personal narratives.
First, with the finding of liability for defamation in a civil court.
And second, with her ultimate conviction for fatal violence against a family member, the second-degree manslaughter of her uncle, Shane Patrick Moore.
The timeline is the central, unavoidable fact here. From massive literary recognition and high-level activism to facing a murder charge and ultimately serving prison time for manslaughter. This comprehensive documented record demonstrates the chasm between a public identity and legal accountability.
It forces us, and you the listener, to confront the power of the judicial record. A carefully built public persona, whether it's as an activist, an artist, or a journalist, can be completely overridden and permanently redefined by a singular, tragic legal event.
Especially one involving the taking of a life and the subsequent judicial process established by the state.
In this complex, often tragic journey, it raises an important question for me to consider long after our conversation concludes. In a case this layered, where personal narrative and advocacy are so fervent, how do we, as observers, interpret the facts when the legal system, which demands documented proof and operates via negotiated settlements, delivers a verdict, such as manslaughter, that runs so aggressively counter to the individual's established public identity?
It's a compelling point about how the objective, often cold structure of the court operates completely independently of the passionate, subjective realm of public advocacy.
Exactly. And we appreciate you trusting us with the source material for this extensive analysis.
Thanks for listening.